This week we're going to have a special feature Shiur discussing a little bit the forthcoming Shiva so Betamuz is going to be taking place this coming week. There are days that Klal Yisrael are misane because of the tzores that happened during those days. If you look in the Rambam, the Tachlis of the Tainis is to be me'orer de levavos and to go bedarkei atshuva shehi as a zikorin lemaaseinu harayim ulemaise avoseinu ad shegomu lehem oiso matzoros shebezichron dvorim elu noshuv lehetiv shenema veisvadu es avoinom ve'es avoin avos. The reason why we perpetuate all these Tanesim is because we have to remember the reason why this tzoros took place, and therefore every single person, as Loshen HaRambam and Rabbeinu Yoine, tzorich odom lefashbesh b'maiso v'loshuv b'tshuva k'mo shekasuv be'anshei Ninveh vayar Hashem es ma'aseyim ve'omu Rabbi Yiseinu Zichroinum livrocho le'ne'ema vayar esakom v'tanisom elo esma'aseyim ve'ein atoinis elo achono l'tshuva. In other words, the reason why we fast is not the fasting the Iker, is doing tshuva, and in order to do tshuva properly, we must be mesaken our drochim and losim al libeinu, the reason why the tzores happened. What are the four Tanesim that we count? The Pasuk says in Zechariah, Tzoim HaRevi'i, V'Tzoim HaChamishi, V'Tzoim HaShevi'i, V'Tzoim HaAsiri. What are the Tzoim HaRevi'i? As we know in the Luach, we start counting all the Chodoshim from Chodesh Nisan. The Chodshei Hashanah are started to be counted according to Torah from Chodesh Nisan. So Chodesh HaRevi'i is Shiva so Betamuz, is Chodesh Tammuz. Tammuz is the fourth month L'minyan HaChodoshim. Tzoim HaChamishi is the Tzoim of Tisha B'Av, which is the fifth month. Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz of. Tzoim HaShvi is Tzoim Gedalia. Tzoim Gedalia ben Achikom, as we know, it really has nothing to do, it's not part of the Churban, but the Gemara Rosh Hashanah Daf Yud Ches Amud Beis says, L'lamdecho sheshkulas misas tzadikim kisreifas beis Elokeinu. We know the whole story that Ishmael ben Nesanyeh killed Gedalia ben Achikom, who was memune on the Shevis HaPleita in Yerushalayim. It didn't last too long. His malchus from Gedalia ben Achikom, his shilton, he killed him, and they perpetuated the tiniest, the shaila. When he killed him, Beis Tisha, Gimel Tisha was a nitre. How was it when there was 1 day Rosh Hashanah, 2 days Rosh Hashanah? We're not getting involved. Al Kaponim, that's called Tzoim HaShvi. And Tzoim HaAsiri is Asora B'Teves, Sheboi Somach Melech Bovel Aloyir. It's the 10th month Tevet. We don't count Tiny Sister because that's not part of the Tanesim. It was a separate Tanis, was made by Esther in the late Kufa, which had to do with the Nes of Purim. But the Tanesim, which are mentioned in the Novi Zechariah, again, Chagai, Zechariah, and Malachi were the last three Nevi'im Achronim. Poscha and Nevuah, but Malachi is the end of the Parsha, the Tkufas HaNevuah. And they came up from Bavel with the Shevis HaPleita, with Ezra Sefer and Nehemiah ben Chachliah, Zerubbabel ben Shalsiel. They came up and they rebuilt the second Beis HaMikdash, and they were there for the Bayis Sheni Poscha Nevuah. And he says in Nevuah, when he starts building Beis HaMikdash Hasheni, he starts seeing Oid Koyom Hashem Tzoim HaRevi'i V'Tzoim HaChamishi V'Tzoim HaShvi V'Tzoim HaAsiri Yeh Lochem. He would convert from being a Yom Ta'anesim, Yom Evel, to Yom of Sosai V'Simcha. And indeed, in Bayis Sheni, before the Churban Bayis Sheni, all those 4 days which were Ta'anesim, they celebrated them L'Sosai and L'Simcha. It's a Shiur b'fnei atzma, maybe around Tisha B'Av we'll speak about this Ta'anesim, which converted and became Sasoin V'Simcha. The Inyan for Shivos B'Tammuz is discussed in a few places in Shas, but the Mekoyer Hadvorim is the Mishnah in Tainis in Dav Chavov Amud Aleph on the bottom. The Mishnah says as follows: Chamisha Dvorim Heiru Es Avoseinu B'Shivos B'Tammuz V'Chamisha B'Tisha B'Av. The Mishnah counts the 5 occurrences which took place to our forefather Avoseinu in Shivos B'Tammuz, and there's 5 occurrences that took place on Tisha B'Av. B'Shivasa B'Tammuz, I'm first going to read, I'm name them all, and then we're going to go each one of these itemized tzoros she'eru l'Avoseinu. Nishtabru haluchos ubutal hatomit vehuvkeo ha'ir vesoraf afutumus esatere ve'emid tzelem b'heichel. So we have 5 different occurrences that took place, we'll soon see, in 5 different kufas, that tzoros she'eru l'Avoseinu in Shivos B'Tammuz. B'Tisha B'Av. What happened on Tisha B'Av? Also, Chamisha Dvorim she'eru l'Avoseinu on Tisha B'Av. Steht in the Mishnah, Nigzar ha'Avoseinu shelo yikonsu la'oretz. V'chorav habayis borishoyne uvashniya. V'nilkedo beisor. V'nechresha ha'ir. 5 things that took place on Tisha B'Av. We'll speak about it as we get to Tisha B'Av, but not right now. The Gemara says, how do you know Nishtabru Aluchos? Nishtabru Aluchos, says the Gemara, the Tanya, B'shisha b'chodesh nitnu aseres adibus leYisrael, Rabbi Yosef b'shiva boy, man de Omar b'shisha nitnu b'shvi ola, Moshe, man de Omar shvi b'shvi nitnu b'shvi ola. This is certainly that Moshe Rabbeinu went back up to Har Sinai after Aseres Hadibros on the 7th day of Sivan. The question if the Dibros were given to him on 6th and he went up on 7th, or both took place in the very same day. The Nesina of Aseres Hadibros was also given in Zion Sivan. Al Kaponim Moshe certainly went up in Zion Sivan. The Ksiv Vayikro El Moshe Bayem Ashvi V'Ksiv Vayi Moshe B'Seicha Ona Vayal Elahor Vayi Moshe Bohor. Chovdale de Sivan, the 24 days of Sivan, V'Shisor de Tammuz, and 16 days of Tammuz. I want to get to the 40 days that Moshe Rabbeinu was in Har Sinai, was 24 plus 16. Those were the days. Molule Arboim, B'Shiva Oso B'Tammuz, Yordo, Noches. Oso V'Tavrinu Leluches. Ksiv vayikash rekov v'ramachta v'yares ha'egel v'yashlach miyod v'saluchis v'yishaber oisom tachas ha'or. So Moshe Rabbeinu, the first thing counted in the Mishnah that took place is Moshe Rabbeinu broke the luchas on Shivos B'Tammuz. Okay, we're not going to do now the next thing, but let's first go and focus on those 3 first items mentioned in the Mishnah. Moshe Rabbeinu, after Maimed Har Sinai and Kabbalah Satere, goes up to Har Sinai and he stays there Aboim Yom v'Aboim Loilo, and he learns Torah Mipi HaGvura. When he comes down with the Luchos, in the Luchos were Chakukim the Aseres Hadibros. Moshe saw the Klal Yisrael made the Egels of. The Gemara has a whole cheshbon. They made a cheshbon. Moshe Shlove. They thought he's coming b'sheish. They made some kind of a mistake. Al Kaponim, they were Ovid Avedizora, they took and they constructed an Egel from Zov. And part of Klal Yisrael, I can't say Gans Klal Yisrael, Shevet Levi was not Choyte Be'egel, the Noshim were not Choyte, but the vast majority of Zechorim from the Shvatim were Choyte in the Egel. Toshash Koichi Shel Moshe, the Gemara tells us the whole story in Shabbos and in Menachos, and the Luchas were broken. He broke the luchas. Not only the luchas were broken on Shivos B'Tammuz, but the Chet HaEgel. L'maisa, the day of Shivos B'Tammuz is the day of Klal Yisrael made the Chet HaEgel, and as a result, Moshe Rabbeinu breaks up the luchas. Let's move on a second to the second occurrence that happened, it says, Vebutal HaTomid. The Tomid is the very basic, fundamental, most important korban, which is being korev every single day al gabe HaMizbeach, Shnei Kvosim Pnim Echad Aboyke V'Echad Ben Abayim. And throughout the Kufa with the Remoim were Tsar and Yerushalayim, in the first Motzer of the Remoim Sobiv Yerushalayim, which took place a number of years, they were able, even though they were under siege, to receive every single day. They were Mishal Shalim Dinorim of Zov to the people on the bottom of the Chayma, and they used to bring them up the Shnei Kvosim in order not to be mevatel the Havodas HaKorbanos in Beis HaMikdash. Shivot, the last time the Kvosim were brought up in order to serve them and to be makriv in Beis HaMikdash was Tezayin Tammuz. In Shivot Sabet Tammuz was the first day that they were misbattle the Avodas HaKorbanos from Korban Tomid. By the way, other Korbanos were mukrav still a little later till the actual Churban. During the 3 weeks Bein HaMetzorim of the Shnas HaChurban, still they were makriv as Eves Shteit Muchach in the Sugis HaGemor in Erechin. They were makriv till the actual Churban, other Korbanos. But the Korban HaTomid, and the mitzvah is, as the Ramban counts, you kol HaKorbanos krevim bein shnei atmidim. This kvius of Korban HaTomid was nisbatel an Shivos B'Tammuz. The third occurrence is that it says Afutoimus burned the Torah. Who was Afutoimus? Is a machlekes the Babylon Yerushalmi, but apparently he was one of the Sorim, the Romans' minister, and he came in and he burnt up the Beis Hamikdash, the Sefer Torah. Ve'emid pesel beBeis Hamikdash. The shaila is, who is this Emid pesel Beis Hamikdash? The Lashon HaMishnah is ve'emid. So some Rishonim learn that Apotoimus, who burned the Torah, he went to the Heichel and he brought a tzelem of Avodah Zarah to put into Heichel. In Yerushalmi, in Tainis, in the fourth parak, state that this is not referring to the Churban, it's referring to the Hamodas HaPesel in Bayis Rishon by Menashe ben Chizkiah, who was Ovid Avodah Zarah. Bal Kaponim, these are the 5 things that happened. But at the end of the day, the reason why they were Kivea the Tainis, for Shviras Haluches, they weren't Kivea Tainis. The time where the Tainis was constituted by the Chachamim was Huv Ke'o Ha'ir. The Yerushalayim, Klal Yisrael, we know, were Moired in the Remoim, and 3 years the Remoim are trying to put a siege on Yerushalayim and to get it back from the Yidden. And after the war in Matzliach, at the end of the day, because the stories, and we're not going to be married right now, the stories of Sinas Chimen and Milchemes Achim that took place, the defenders, the Jewish defenders who protected Yerushalayim got shvacher. There was a machlekes, and the machlekes brought about a chulsha, and the Reimoim was nisgabru. How were the misgaber? It says that on Shivos B'Tammuz, they were matzliach to penetrate, to break the chayma, the wall around Yerushalayim, and to break in Pnima. Kol Zman of the 3 years, the Remoim were outside, and Yidden were fighting with chitzim and blistores. This old Yemei HaKoires who would describe very, very in detail the whole Milcham of the 3 years, but Al Koponim at the end, because of Sinas Chin and because of the machlekes between the Achim, the whole story there, and it happened that these Remoim were matzliach to penetrate and to break into the city, the Churban. 3 weeks there were bitter fights in the streets of Yerushalayim, Esrim ve'echad yoim, until on Tisha B'Av they captured the Arabais and they burned the Beis Hamikdash Hasheni, and thereafter Klal Yisrael goes to a major Golus, the second Golus of Churban Bayis Sheni. When did this thing take place, really? When did this Huvko a year? So I'd like to learn with you. This is something which is very unique and special. There's not too many times that we have time to focus on it. But if we were to look at Sefer Yirmiyah, in Perek Lametes, and I'm quoting the first two psukim, Sefer Yirmiyah, steht azay, Bashono Hachi'is. Now, Sefer Yirmiyah is describing Churban Bayis Rishon, not Churban Bayis Sheni. There's a Churban Bayis Rishon, which stood on its place 410 years, and during the Tkuf of Yirmiyahu, Nebuchadnezzar comes and he destroys first Beis Hamikdash. They go to Golus Bubble for 70 years. They come back, they rebuild the second temple. Ezra and Nehemiah, they stay there till the Tkufa of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai 420 years later. So we have 410 years, 70 years, and 420 years together for the Tkufa of Bayis Rishon and Bayis Sheni and Golus Bubble in between. State in the Pasuk in Yirmiyah, which is talking about Bayis Rishon, not talking about Bayis Sheni. State azay. Bashona Achis leTzidkiyahu Melech Yehuda, B'chodesh Ho'asiri, okay, Bo Nebuchadnezzar Melech Bovel V'chol Chelu Yerushalayim V'yatzuru Aleh. He's talking about B'chodesh Ha'asiri. Chodesh Ha'asiri is Tevis, Asora B'Tevis, in the 10th year of, in the 9th year of Tzidkiyahu Melech Yehuda. That's when he started Somach Melech Bavel. The year he started, this is the term of Asar B'Tevis. That really was the beginning of the Milchama of the Nebuchadnezzar Melech Bavel, who came on top of Yerushalayim. This was in the Shona Achis in Chodesh Tevis. The next pasuk, Be'ashtei Asor Shono LeTzidkiyahu B'chodesh Horevi Betisha LeChodesh Hufker year. Thereafter, in 3 years later, it says b'feish b'chodesh harevi, it's chodesh Tammuz, betisha l'chodesh tes Tammuz nivker huvker ha'ir. Lashon ha'pasuk, right? So the Gemara says a Bayis Rishon Yerushalayim really was huvker not in Yerushalayim was not huvker in Yud Zayin b'Tammuz, but in Tes Tammuz. As there's a pasuk before, she can't dingzach, he can't fight with a pasuk before. The reason why we fast in Shivasa b'Tammuz, why isn't the Tainis on Tes Tammuz? Why not? Steht in the Gemara in Tainis in Daf Chof Ches Amud Beis, because in Bayis Sheni they penetrated Yerushalayim, the Roimoim. That's not Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar is Bayis Rishon, Bayis Sheni is the Roimoim. The Remoim coming by Sheni, they broke the walls of Yerushalayim on Shivasa b'Tammuz. And therefore, the Tzoyim was constituted based on the Bekiyah of the Shtot Yerushalayim in Bayis Sheni, not in Bayis Rishon. So the truth of the matter is, what a pasuk in Sefer Zechariah says, Tzoyim HaRevi v'Tzoyim HaChamishi, he's talking about right now, the beginning. Zechariah wasn't alive at the end of Bayis Sheni. Zechariah was alive at the end of Bayis Rishon and the beginning of Bayis Sheni. When he says Tzoyim HaRevi v'Tzoyim HaChamishi v'Tzoyim HaShvi'i v'Tzoyim HaAsiri, he's talking about Tzoyim HaRevi is Tzoyim of Tammuz, but not Shivasa b'Tammuz that comes out. He's referring to the 9th of Tammuz, because in Bayis Rishon the Uvker Psukim Mefaroshim in Tes Tammuz and not in Shivasa b'Tammuz. Toises in Rosh Hashanah in Daf Yud Ches Amud Beis says V'hach Braise Masnisim b'Yerushalmi V'golsina bo Yud Zayin Tammuz. Toises says that even though it says by us that it happened on Tes Tammuz, the Yerushalmi is Goyris Yud Zayin Tammuz even in Bayis Rishon. Ve'af al gav diksiv bikro, Toises fragt Takasha, you can't fight the whole, steht doch in Pasuk Mefurish, B'chi l'chodesh, kilkul cheshboines hoyushal. There was some kind of misunderstanding, some kind of a mistake, and they didn't keep the right cheshbon. Upol legashas didon, ve'roitz loimar demitoich tirdosom tov b'cheshboinom, ve'leirotz ha'posuk l'shanis in other words, they made a toast. They were fatumult, they were tzemisht, and because of their mistake, they counted Tisha b'Tammuz. And since they made a mistake, when the pasuk says B'Tisha l'chodesh uvkayir, the pasuk is perpetuating the mistake that they made, and they really held that it happened on Tes Tammuz. But the emes here that according to the Yerushalmi, Sai Ufke Oir by Srish Sai by Sheni, it all happened on Shivas Tammuz. You know, the problem with that is that the Mishnah says Chamisha Dvorim Iru beLaviseinu b'Shivas Tammuz, Chamisha Dvorim beTisha B'Av. What are the Chamisha Dvorim in Tisha B'Av? Chamisha Dvorim in Tisha B'Av is Horav Bais Rishon v'Bais Shein. In other words, the Churban of Bais Rishon and Bais Shein the same day happens to be two different soras that because of them we are fasting and we're making the whole inyan, the whole tightness of Tisha B'Av. So Bishlam, if you're going to learn that the truth of the matter is that the Bais was Horav on Tes, Adei Yerushalayim was penetrating on Tes. On Tes Tammuz, like it's the Poshet Pshat in the Pasuk. So I understand why it says in the Chamisha Dvorim we only count Huvke or year once. But if you're going to say that according to the Yerushalmi, really in essence took place the Churban Abayis in Shivas B'Tammuz, and they made a mistake, they made a kilkul cheshbainas, and the pasuk did not want to deviate from their mistake and perpetuated the mistake. So l'chura, the same way the Mishnah says that in the Chamisha Tzoros that happened l'Aviseinu, it should have counted also the Shivas B'Tammuz sheboi huvke o'ir barishonu b'shniya. Exactly the same thing. Chorav abayis barishonu. We see that the tzara that happens of huvke o'ir is counted in one of the tzoros of Shivas B'Tammuz, and you see that the tzara of Churban Abayis is counted as one of the tzoros of Churban Abayis. But because Tisha B'Av, there's no question that Sai Bais Rishon and Sai Bais Sheni, the occurrence took place on Tisha B'Av, and therefore we counted as two different me'oiroes she'yiru l'Aviseinu on Tisha B'Av. So too in Shivas B'Tammuz, in as much that it really happened according to the Yerushalmi on Shivas B'Tammuz, it should have said Lemaise, it should have said that in the Shisha Dvorim Nasu l'Aviseinu b'Shivas B'Tammuz. The Nihuvke or here Barishenu Bashniya. The emes Yoyra Darkoi, that there is a Peladik Marsha. I'm reading the Marsha. The Marsha says in Tainis Daf Chofchesa with Beis, and I would like to read the Lashon of Marsha. What does it mean? B'Yerushalmi Tiritz, I'm reading the Marsha. Be'inyan Achet, the Kilkul Cheshbeines Hoyasham, Venir Leforish. לפי שאום ישראל אומינים לחמו וישראל ללבון ועל ידי אויבים אויבדי עבד הסלילים שגוזרו על חשבון הלבון וקידש החודש כמוי שכוסו במסכת ראש השונה נעשה זה הקילקו ובוודאי בי"ז בתמוז בחודש הלבונו נבכה העיר גם בראשונה כמפורש בקרוא בירמיהו מקל שקד אני רואה שהם חופה אלף יומים שבין 17 תמוז לתשעה באב. So the Mashal more says Makel the Shoked, this nut, the Shaked, the Makel Shaked Ani Roeh, this almond is growth. The Gemara says, the Medrash says, Chofal of Yom. From the time of Chanota till the Gemara Pri takes 21 days. So too, Ani Shaked, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says that I am, and the Churban Makel Shaked Ani Roeh, he tells you Yirmiyah is in Bais Rishon. And it says the same way to the 21 days from the Zman of the beginning, the inception of the Chanota of the Shoked, of the Makel Shoked Ani Roeh, which is Shivas B'Tammuz. From Shivas B'Tammuz, we know we have 3 weeks, 21 days. That is 21. So the Marsha is Behechrech. You have to say, if on Tisha B'Av was Chorva a year, Chorva Ba'Bayis, Barishena Bashniya, that also Ufka a year in Rishona happened in Shivas B'Tammuz. So the Marsha, but the story is like this. We know the Klal Yisrael is made in Levana, and the Umasoilim is Mainim Lachamo. The Shnoi Sachamo, a solar year and a lunar year, the difference, the gap is that the solar year 365 years, 355 days a year, and the Shnoi Shnas Halavana is 354. These 11 days. That's what we know that the Chodoshim is totally in Oynes Hashanah. Chaga Oviv, that's what we make a Yibur basically every 3 years, not exactly every 3 years, but on average, on or about every 3 years, because we're missing 33 days, and we have to have Pesach has to happen b'chodesh Aviv during the springtime. Therefore, we make a Ibur Hashan. But Klal Yisrael is Zmeina LaLevana and the Umas Oilam is Zmeina LaChamo. And they forced Klal Yisrael, Zog the Masho, they forced Klal Yisrael, they made a Gzeira not to be Ovid, not to make the Jewish calendar according to the Levana, but according to the Cham. Zog the Masho. אבל לפי קלקול חשבון של האויבים, שמיינים לחמה לא היו רק בטס תמוז. דשנס החמה מויסיב על שנס הלבון י"א יומים, נמצא שבגימל תקופס מתשרי התמוז מויסיב חס יומים, שבין תשרי תמוז לחמה ובין י"ז הלבון. זה מויד כבוד. He says that the reason why the Pasuk says that Betisha but by Srishon was Betisha l'chodesh. Behemes Yeredarko, Zog the Marshal, it happened on Shavas B'Tammuz. It didn't happen on Tisha B'Tammuz. It happened on Shavas B'Tammuz. And the raya that he has is from the Medrash that says that 21 days, Makel Shaked, and that's the Nevuah of Yirmiyah, which took place in Bais Rishon. Really? But since the Moed L'Shnei Sachama and the Oiv the Kechovim forced Klal Yisrael to change the calendar from lunar year to solar year, so these 11 days, so if you count Tishri Cheshvan, Kislev, Teves Shvat, Odol, Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, 3 Chalokim of the year, which is about approximately 8 out of 11. 8 out of 11 years of the gap passed by. So Mimeila comes out that Tisha L'chodesh Tammuz, which is mentioned in the Pasuk in Yirmiyah, not Kilkul Cheshbonah, so you come, they made a mistake. Pashut like it was a toast, and they made a mistake, and the pasuk is perpetuated the toast. By the way, Rabbi Lozo Moshe Horowitz said that he writes that Lula Yotzo Advo Mipir Rabbi Seinu Ba'alei Toisus Ela Ini Shachina V'Amrina Lo Have Ach Lon L'Mishmei. We don't have to listen to it. He's Pashut angry at Toisus. He says, Toisus, I don't know what to do. Toisus said they perpetuated, killed the whole pasuk. He's perpetuating the mistakes of Klal Yisrael. Maharsha says no. The reason why the pasuk says that it took place in B'Tish B'Chodesh Uvka or year is because the pasuk is talking about what the Umas Oilam, the pasuk. And by the way, this is the very only times that we have a Goyish date mentioned in Tanakh. It's not so pashut. One spoke about it. Somebody came to Chaim Kanievsky at a Machlekes with Rav Shach. If there is such a thing as an English birthday, which is very fascinating, very interesting, and he brought it right. He says, Ka'is Chayil of a Sorah Ben, he made him a scrape in the Koisel, and he says, when the Chama will come next year to here, how can the Chama come here? The Chama is Ka'is Chayil, he's telling him in a year from now, and a year, we know it takes a full year for the cycle of the Chama, Kadar Or, so apparently there is such a thing as counting an English birthday. It's a fascinating subject and topic, how we misiachas to English birthdays. But apparently the Maharsha says that the pasuk that says B'Tisha L'chodesh, it's be'emes in our calendar, in the Jewish calendar, was Yudzayin B'Tammuz. And that's why it really took only 21 days in Churban Bais Rishon from the B'Kiah Soyer till the Churban. The only reason why it's mentioned as Tes Tammuz is because it was according to the when I was young, I used to be zeicha to be mistafif a little bit and to listen to one of the Rosh Yeshivas in Yeshivas Kolter in Yerushalayim. His name was Rabbi Yoina Merzbach. He was a very great scholar, big Talmid Chacham, but he knew very much about the Luach. He was a Yekishe, a Deutsche Godel, and he was the author of the Encyclopedia Talmudis. And he put out a sefer, and I just took a look at the sefer it's called Alei Yoina. So he has a siman, and he writes, and I want to quote what he says. It's a tumult. He says he doesn't understand. Pasuk should perpetuate a wrong date for something that really didn't take place because there was a tumult. They couldn't hold the calendar because it was time of a war, so it's a wrong calendar. So Pasuk is going to say the wrong date to perpetuate what they made a mistake. He says, "V'yesh hes beracher b'marsho." He quotes a marsho. "Shelchesh ben chod shechama matchil m'tkufas Tammuz shebeu Yisrael machriv v'abayis oyemoin b'em esufke ayi b'tisho b'Tammuz shelchamo. Aval min chod shel levana shelono oye b'tzayim b'Tammuz ve'akil kul hoya ben shnei cheshbonos elu. V'yesh lehoisif." Listen to it. This is a person who really knew the calendar and Tanakh very, very well. Shekefi shemuchach mikol chezyones Yecheskel, all the nevuos of Yecheskel. Ba'avinasenu Arabim Rabim Hoyu Oivde Hashemesh Be'oisa Zman B'Yisrael. Klal Yisrael, a large part of Klal Yisrael, where Oivde was Oivde Ba'avinasenu Arabim Oivde Hashemesh Shebevadai Monu Lefi Chodsheh V'Tkufoso V'Nichtov Gam B'Mikro Zman Kibush Yerushalayim Lefi Cheshbon Hagoyim V'Azaynim Achareim El Kvias HaTainis Hoyso Lefi HaEmes Shelonu Lefi HaTarich L'Chodsheh HaLevon. So he says, he says a lot of people, you see from Chezyonis Yecheskel, he has a whole arichas about it. There were later, Oivdim, not all of them, people were Oivdim of the Zohar, and some of them were going according to the Chodsheh HaChama, not according to Chodsheh HaLevana. So the reason why the Pasuk is saying what he's saying, the Marsha says, as I saw it for it, that the reason why, because it happened because the Goyim forced them at the time to go to change the calendar according to Chodsheh HaChama. So Mimele Tisha B'Chodesh doesn't mean Tisha. Really, in our Jewish calendar, if you take a calendar for 6,000 years, and Repan Shivasa B'Tammuz, it took 21 days between B'Kia Sayir and between the Churban HaBayis. But it just doesn't perpetuate. Tesis seems to be saying a very strange Chidush. And everybody's tumult to the Tesis that they were tumult and they made it kill Kol Cheshbainis. And therefore, the Navi is saying, Yirmiyahu is saying, according to what their mistake, which is very hard to digest by the Psadas, the Shver Tesis. But the Marsha would like to suggest that it really was Tes Tammuz, but Lefchodsheh HaChama, because 8 out of 11 is basically 3/4 of the year that pass by, and therefore, if you add on top of Tes another Ches, you're going to get the Shavuos of Tammuz. And he's adding on that when the Chachomim came and later on and made a constitution of a tainis to perpetuate the Churban and to perpetuate the Tzoros, Avada, they took unsere calendar, our calendar. But the Navi, he's speaking about the calendar that they counted by Israel for, the only problem I have with that is, because somebody who knows Navi, you look at the same parak that it says, B'tisha b'chodesh hu year, look in Yirmiyahu, in Perek Nun Beis, it's twice in Yirmiyahu, Saim Perek Lametes and Saim Perek Nun Beis. It says both times, it says B'tisha l'chodesh hu year. But if we look at the later psukim, it says, Ubachodesh, I'm quoting, look at, somebody wants to look in Perek Nun Beis in Yirmiyahu, and Pasuk Yud Beis, and I'm quoting the Pasuk. Ubachodesh HaChamishi, we're talking about Chodesh of, Be'asoyer l'chodesh, Bo Nevuzaradan Rav Tabochim, Vayisov es Beis Hashem ves Beis HaMelech. He burnt, we know the Gemara says that really the Bais was Nisraf in Assyria, and the reason why we started the Eis Erev in Tisha B'Av, Motzei Tisha B'Av, started burning. But the Pasuk says, Mikra Mole Diber HaKosov, the Pasuk says, that Be'asoyer l'chodesh, Bo Nevuzaradan Rav Tabochim, Vayisov es Beis HaMelech. So, Bishlam, according to Tesis, the Tesis says that because there was a tumult at that time, Klal Yisrael is in Milchama, they broke the calendar, broke their thing, and there was a tumult, they made a mistake. They lost the calendar, and they messed up, and they saw there was 9th. So I understand that afterwards, when it came, a couple days came by, after they already broke, they came into the new Chodesh, and they see the new Levana, and it comes to Chodesh Av, they realized they made a mistake, and it really was Shivas B'Tammuz because they saw, according to Levana, the Chidush HaLevana, Rosh Chodesh Av. That's why the Pasuk is saying, Klapa, a few psukim later, Klapa the Churban HaBayis, it took a place in Asir Be'ov. But according to the Shtikol Torah, the Marsha, that the reason why it says Betisha is not because of a mistake and there was a tumult and they were miscalculated, but because it was Bedavka, because the Goyim forced them, the Goyim by Yisrael Eisa, the Machar Yerushalayim, that are penetrating in Bayis Rishon, the Nebuchadnezzar, the Tzva, the Vuzaradan, they're coming in and they're forcing them to go according to Shnei Sacham and not according to Shnei Salavono. So why does it say, Man ishtano sreifas habayis, that the Pasuk quotes it according to the 10th of which is Le'oir HaLevana, because otherwise, if we go according to the Le'oir HaChama, it should have been Rosh Chodesh Av, it should have been that, 21 days after Tisha, It should have been, you should say, Be'echad l'chodesh ha'asiri, and not Ba'asiri l'chodesh ha'asiri, Ba'asiri l'chodesh, and Ba'asiri l'chodesh ha'chamishi, which is chodesh Av, he should have said that, and not that. And that's a big tzorich here in the Maharsha, that the very next pasuk, a couple pasukim later, from pasuk Vav to pasuk Yud Beis, it counts it already according to Shnei Salvan and not according to Shnei Sacham. We don't have too much time left, but the Minchas Chinuch, I'd just like to end off with the Minchas Chinuch. Minchas Chinuch in Shin Aleph has a big arichas. The Minchas Chinuch says a shtickle Torah, which is fascinating, and he says that the emes midivrei Kabbalah, the tainis, there wasn't any Yom Yuchad. The tainis was Tzoyim HaRevi, V'Tzoyim HaChamishi, V'Tzoyim HaShvi, V'Tzoyim HaAsiri. The tainis on that month, and I'm reading. The Arba Tzoyim HaSalom midivrei Kabbalah enik bolem Yom Yuchad asora b'tevis Tisha B'Av v'kayotze b'zeh. HaKadiv Kabbalah al Eila HaChadoshim, the B'tevis, V'Tamuz, V'Ov, V'Tishrei, Mechuyovim Lisanes B'Eim Yom Echad. There is a din on the Chodesh Mechuyev. אבל לא נסייחד יום ייחוד, רק איזה יום שלא יצא יוכל להיסענס רק באילה החדוש. וראיה לדובר, בספר זכריה אין מבוא כלל, יום כלל, רק צום הרביעי, צום החמישי וצום השביעי וצום העשירי, דהיינו החדושים. והאובי לכל ראיס ברורס, I'll bring you ראיס ברורס, and I'm right that באמס יוירד דרכוי, that the perpetuation, the Divrei Kabbalah was on the Chodesh, and the Divrei Kabbalah was not on the particular day. Okay, I'm going to skip, we don't have time, about one raya brings down from the Asar B'Tevis. Let's go to the second raya. V'gam shom mevur, I'm quoted in Minchas Chinuch, anybody wants to see Mitzvah Shin Aleph. The Betisha Betamuz huvkeo year. Ve'eich mis'anim b'shivosor, u'metar, the Gemara has a kasha. The Gemara has a kasha. Shtei Betisha, and why we sabu, u'metar tzrove, by sheni necha b'shivosor boy. The more says like kasha kam b'rishon kam b'sheni. The more pashtus means to say by rishon really it was uvke a year betes tamuz, and by sheni was in shivas betamuz. Umavusha beteises u'bay sheni chomer lo lakem misani b'yudzayin. So since by sheni is more chomer to us, so therefore we didn't perpetuate both 9th and Tammuz and Yudzayin. We made it only Yudzayin. V'tmiya gdoilo zog the Minchas Chinuch. Erecholim la'akor divrei Kabbalah shu ketayra aval lichboa gam Yudzayin boy. ואם כושר לציבור יכולים לעקר דובר בתוירה בקום ועשר לאכול וליש שתיינה מדברי קבול בשעת השמד כמבואר ברמב"ן בתוירה סורדום. ועוד רבי יוחנן אומר אלוהיסה שם כבוסי בעשיר ורבון הנסחלת לפרוס העדיפו איך היו שם? איך לא היו שם קבוע בעשיר וכדידי הדובר טוב מדברי קבולה אלא ודאי הוא הדובר אשר דיברתי די הקבולה לא היסה יום מיוחד רק החודשים באיזה יום בחודש שלא יצא מסענים וכן בימי סוסה ושמחה באיזה יום שלא יצא מויסי סוסה ושמחה אם כן בבית שני יומוקם כל נויה כמו שהיו רויצים ואחרי שנחרב הבייס בשנייה ורויצים נקבע יום לכל ישראל בשווה קעיד את קייס, it brings down a whole shtickle there, וביע לנו חז"ל לאחר יומים אלה, והיו דעס רב עקיבא שעצוי מסור בטבעס יצור לישראל, אף בשביל וכן אומר רבי יוחנן כובע בעשירי, and therefore also מכל מקום לנעקרו הקבלה לאוילום because there was no gzeira and the takana of the tainis was not on the yoim but on the chodesh. But if the names just to wrap it up, Shivasa B'Tammuz, one of the 5 things that happens Ufka a year. Pashta the Sudas Agamori in Talmud Bavli is that in Bayis Rishon was Horav in Teisho, in 9th of Tammuz, like Azev Shishtet in Psukim in Yiriyah, and Bayis Sheni Yud Zayin. And since Teisha says Bayis Sheni is more Chomor, it's Yud Zayin. Question is, how are you Oiker the Tainis, how are we doing such a thing? So some of the suggestions are that really it happened on Shivasa B'Tammuz. The Yerushalayim says, and because of Kilkul Cheshbainis, which is a very modern word, that the Novi should perpetuate the Kilkul Cheshbainis, the Maharsha wants to say it wasn't a Kilkul, was the Kilkul just means that the Goyim made him perpetuate the date, and right in the Novi Tarikh, which is not the Jewish date, but basically the Goyish date, which is Shver from the Pasuk later, and then we have the Minchas Chinuch that wants to suggest that perhaps Bichlal there is no Chodesh, there is no Yom B'Chodesh, it's only the Chodesh itself, in which the Chacham will kaver according to the needs be'oisa hashal.